All right, we're live on Instagram and Substack. So this is the story that writes back. That's what I named this. This is going to be a 7-day series of lives where I read a quick passage from my book Sozwik. We decode it together because there's messages for everyone. And then after decoding it and talking a little bit about what this is mirroring for us, then we're going to get into a quick writing session. So we're actually going to write here together because I talk a lot about building the habit of writing, and I want to create spaces for people to actually do that. So with that said, feel free to grab a pen and pad if you want to write that way, because you can journal, you can write anything that you want to write. So if you want to do some journaling or write with a pen and pad, make sure you get that, or you can pull up a document on your phone or computer, whatever you prefer, because I'll give you a prompt, but it will be open-ended as well. I just want to set aside, it's going to be 5 minutes for you to get into a little flow state writing while we're holding space for each other here. So that is the flow and agenda of these. Quick passage, a decodement and what it means for us and what it's mirroring, and then a writing session together, okay? So this is the first day of this, and I feel like the best theme to go by is the call to adventure, because if you know like the hero's journey framework, that's the first part of the hero's journey. It's the call to adventure. And we all experience this in our lives, not just once, but multiple times, maybe even every day, because it could be like a fractal or a microcosm where you have little calls to adventure every day. So what I'm going to be reading every day is an excerpt from my book Sozwik. So this is a story about an extraterrestrial Sasquatch shaman who comes to Earth and finds himself in the middle of a spiritual war. It's an interesting premise, but I wrote it as fiction to actually tell higher truths that couldn't just be expressed by writing essays or articles. I was able to interweave so many themes into this story. And in hindsight, I realized I was channeling things too. I would get into these deep flow states while writing, and then months or years later realize what I was writing. Whether it was like some of the scenes or the symbolism I used, I would realize later like, wow, I can't believe I did that. So fiction has a way of telling deep truths. That's why so much of society is based on mythology. That's why religion is based on stories. That's why people love movies and TV shows and novels. Stories are powerful, and they can be powerful, potent ways of telling higher truths. Okay, so I'm going to do a little reading from Sozwik. It'll just be like 2 pages. A little ginger tea in my throat. So on the theme of the call to adventure. So this is Sozwik's call to adventure in the beginning of the book. Okay? Chapter 1, the departure. Okay? That's where we're starting. On the hilltop, so far removed from the underground caverns, Sozwik found himself reluctantly relieved. The landscape exhibited an intense openness. The fresh air running through his hair felt like being birthed into an entirely new world. For Sozwik, leaving would have been more difficult if he had a choice. But his hands were tied. Sozwik had earned his freedom. After a lifetime of forced slavery inside the Zapixian mines, he had achieved what so few had been able to do. Sozwik toiled his way up to top rank, the highest position a Jotai could obtain, and was the youngest yet to do so. Just 7 Jotai of every generation were granted freedom, and only those of top rank were even eligible. Freedom was a fleeting dream that so many clung to, yet such a small number would ever taste. The leading theory was that this was done for two reasons. The first, to provide desperate, almost unattainable hope for the masses. The second was to stifle any possibility of rebellion by shipping the potential leaders off. The craft appeared out of the peaceful purple sky, silhouetted by the omnipresent rays of the great star. It landed on the square, dull, metallic platform, mere meters from the group of 7. The group bowed their heads, joining the entire Jotai race in a final goodbye, a soothing invocation that was unspoken, yet directly experienced, connecting thousands of kindred spirits in reverence. An abrupt bark snapped the silence. "Move!" The gold-armored guards grunted through their gnarled steel blue jaws. Their staffs were as menacing as their eyes, and both were bitterly fixated on the Jotai as the 7 began to walk up the gray loading ramp and onto the ship. "Until next life, fuckheads," Sozwik jokingly communicated. The other 6 produced a slight smirk because, of course, the guards couldn't possibly hear it. Aboard the craft, they were greeted by the all-too-familiar hostile presence of another gang of guards. The Jotai had learned to live with it and became comfortable with being constantly uncomfortable. It was Sozwik's first time in a craft. The metallic hull was like the insides of a monstrous beast. Curved beams lined the sides and looped around an immense concave ceiling. The floors were smooth, solid silver, giving the interior a cold disposition. There were 8 authoritative red security doors laid out symmetrically that led to the more comfortable rooms and the pilot station. The Jotai could only imagine the extravagant luxuries that these rooms held. After a short stint of standing in the hall, Sozwik felt a sudden pressure in his legs. The craft had left the ground. For the first time in his life, Sozwik ascended out of the blanket-like atmosphere of Saren, his home planet. I'm going to stop there. That's a good place to stop. So that is the call to adventure where Sozwik leaves his home planet. So he's granted freedom, I use quotes, by this force called the Guard that has enslaved his race and his planet. And he's one of those nominated to go to Earth, who gets sent to Earth for this freedom. But as you'll find out, there are hidden agendas, and it's really just a slick way that the Guard, this force, uses to study the Jotai race and to learn from them and use what they learn, or try to use what they learn against them and against others that they're trying to control. So that is Sozwik's call to adventure. And I want to highlight a couple sub-themes there. One was the contrast. And contrast is something we all experience, especially when it comes to being called to our next level or called to a new self or a new reality. So that contrast is shown in how Sozwik's whole race has this like peaceful, unspoken, telepathic goodbye. And that gets contrasted by one of the guards. They snap, they pierce the silence, and they say, "Move, move." So it like snaps them out of this reverie. So you see this contrast just to kick off the book of a peaceful, harmonious society clashing with this force called the Guard and the servants of the Guard, which are very abrupt, trying to control everything, domineering. And we see this contrast in our life. We have different catalysts, different challenges to propel us to our next levels. So that's one theme. And another theme is Sozwik, even in the beginning of this, does have a degree of mastery because he studied a shamanic tradition his whole life, even though he's still pretty young. He studied a shamanic tradition, and he has achieved some degree of self-mastery. So there are fears coming up. There's a bit of trepidations with Sozwik, but he's able to navigate that unknown, even though he has those. So that's another interesting dynamic, because when you have self-awareness, when you're able to regulate your nervous system, the fears might arise. You might get a bit nervous, but that doesn't control your actions. You're able to navigate through. You're able to navigate the unknown. And that's what Sozwik finds himself doing. It's like, despite his fears and his hesitations, he's learning how to navigate the unknown and navigate his purpose that's slowly unfolding before him. And in tomorrow's live, I'll talk a little bit more about his hesitations and his purpose, because that starts opening up in the next conversation we'll have tomorrow. So think about, in your life, what are the calls to adventure? What are the calls to adventure that you've had in your life? So I'll give a mirror of myself, and this gets meta, but it's fun. Writing Sozwik was a call to adventure for me. I didn't know I would write this. I didn't plan on writing fiction at all. But one day while I was hiking alone in Acadia National Park, I was making my way back toward my car, and I heard in the distance the sound of a car, like, going by. You know how when a car is approaching and it's far away, you hear like, and it builds, and then it turns into like a whoosh as it goes past you, and then it fades away. So I heard that in the distance, and a thought came to me. It was just like, what would it be like to be an extraterrestrial Sasquatch shaman hearing that for the first time? That thought popped in my mind. And that became not the first scene of Sozwik, not the first scene chronologically in the book, but the first scene that I thought of. It's one of the scenes in the book. And that was my call to adventure. But I didn't start the book until like a year and a half after that. It took that long. It took that scene marinating in my mind. I'm pretty sure I wrote it down somewhere. But then I got a series of other signs and insights where I was like, okay, I have to write this. That scene came to me for a reason. And I started writing it. And it also mirrored, I might get into this in one of the other lives, but writing Sozwik mirrored my own journey of quitting my corporate job and traveling the world for a while. So that was an interesting mirror. I'll probably talk about that in another one. So that's a little hint. But think about calls to adventure from your life. And some of them can be small. Like I said, you might be experiencing one every day. These little calls to adventure. And there's bigger ones in your life. And sometimes these calls to adventure, like in a lot of movies and stories, even in Sozwik, he kind of gets thrown into it. You know, it's not his conscious choice to come to Earth. He gets wrapped up in it. Just like how in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker, in episode 4, the first one, A New Hope, Luke Skywalker gets wrapped into his Jedi training and, all the stuff with Obi-Wan Kenobi and things like that, because his family dies. It's like the boats get burned, basically, and he kind of has no choice but to move ahead. So these kind of things happen to us in our life, these calls to adventure. Like maybe you lose a job, and that's a call to adventure that throws you into a new reality. And how do you navigate that? Do you freak out and withdraw? Or do you, like Sozwik's doing, start drawing upon your self-mastery and navigate the unknown, navigate the chaos, even though it might be scary, even though you have no idea what's going on, even though it could be completely new, learning to navigate that with mastery. So a lot of these calls to action, calls to adventure, are things that come to us unexpectedly, are things that feel bigger than us that we get thrown into. But it's how you respond, okay? If you're watching on Substack or Instagram. That's where I'm going live, both of those. Write in the comments a call to adventure that you had, that might have come to you unexpectedly, that you navigated to become a new version of yourself, or that you navigated into a new reality. And then also, like I mentioned, think about the little things on a daily basis that act as this. Maybe something unexpected happens on your way to work, but it provides an opportunity. Maybe another work example, someone gives you a random task that you've never received before. And if you're so set in your ways, you might be defensive. But if you're open to it, you might see it as an opportunity. Things like that. Yeah, things like that. The calls to adventure. And we're going to ride this momentum because that's going to be a prompt for this writing session, okay? So I'm going to provide a prompt, but you don't have to use the prompt to write. It's just going to be a little bit of structure for people who might need that structure. So the prompt is, what is your call to adventure right now in your life? Or to put it in other words, what's on the edge of your consciousness right now that is beckoning to you? What is the call to adventure in your life right now? Okay? We can use that as a journaling or writing prompt, but also maybe some of you might be already clear on what that is. You might be like, yeah, I need to work on my book. Or yeah, I need to write that article. If you're in that camp where you're like, yeah, I need to work on this specific project, what that call to adventure is, and it's a project, then you can work on that for the next few minutes while we do this. But if you don't feel that level of certainty, use that as a prompt. What is your call to adventure right now in your life? And you can use journaling to feel into that. You can write your stream of consciousness to feel into what's calling you. Okay? So I'm going to give you 5 minutes of silent writing time. And again, you can use that prompt, or you can go right into working on that project you need to work on for 5 minutes. And because it's just 5 minutes, you could leave yourself a note and then work on it later. But I just want to get everyone into this flow and hold that space. Okay? So 5 minutes starting right now. We're going to be silent for 5 minutes while everyone writes. Happy writing. And I'll remind you when the 5 minutes is up. All right, that is 5 minutes. If you got into a flow, feel free to make a note and you can come back to it. And there's something magical about just holding space and us doing something together, like actual focused work time. I've noticed when I do this, just 5 minutes will produce so much, because it's creating this space and creating this shared intention, and that bolsters our focus, our creativity, our flow state, so I always find it really powerful when we do this, even for just 5 minutes. You can get so much done and reveal so much. So that's why I do this. And I also do it in my Soulful Writing Collective. That's part of our weekly calls where we do 20 minutes of focused writing. Because, like I said, some people, including myself, talk about the importance of writing every day. But I want to be about it more. I want to hold space for people to create. And I've done it so much that I feel embodied in it, in my energy. So when I hold space for other people to write, they get into flow state more easily. So that's why I do it in my Soulful Writing Collective. And that is a community of conscious creators who write spiritual activations, let's call it. It could be poetry, it could be song lyrics, it could be stories. Whatever it is writing that is spiritual activations, spiritual transmissions. So you're writing knowing that it serves a higher purpose, knowing that you're sparking people's souls, you're sparking awakening. So the Soulful Writing Collective is for these people, and we get together, we write together on the calls, and I'm building it as a network to help each other spread our work further, to reach the right people. So our messages, so our work isn't hidden anymore. Because a lot of people writing these spiritual transmissions, whether it's poetry or stories or whatever, the mainstream stuff, the bureaucratic institutions don't resonate so much with them. And they're not even ready for a lot of this kind of content writing activations. So that's why I'm building this as a network where we help each other, where we decode each other's work and help spread each other's messages and help ideate with each other, share what's working and what's not working, so that in synergy we grow. So that's the intention behind the Soulful Writing Collective. And it's just getting started. So if you join now, you're going to be at the ground floor and you're going to play a role in shaping it. So that's really cool. If that resonates with you, I'll put the link to the Soulful Writing Collective wherever I can. It's in my bio on Instagram. And then the other thing I want to talk about is Sozwik. So if you're interested in Sozwik, you can find the book at sozwik.com. I made it easy for you. SOZWIK.com. Easy. And there's 2 books. Here's book number 2. This is the proof copy version. That's why there's this thing. But there's 2 books. Sozwik 1 and Sozwik 2. And I'm working on turning this into a movie. So that's something that I'm turning my attention to. So if you know anyone who produces movies, most likely it would be an animated movie. But if you know someone or if you're someone who could play a part in Sozwik becoming a movie, hit me up. Okay? So, yeah, that's it. If you're a writer who writes spiritual activations, spiritual transmissions, check out the Soulful Writing Collective. And also, everyone, check out Sozwik at sozwik.com. That wraps up today's session, the call to adventure. Tomorrow, we're going to get into the next one. The next one is more conflict-based. I think I called it the fracture. So it's going to be interesting. So stay tuned for that tomorrow, same time, 8 p.m. Eastern. Sending you all so much love and gratitude. I'll be back on Substack and Instagram tomorrow, and I'll repost this everywhere. Thank you, thank you, thank you.